I'm gonna give it a couple more minutes before we start. Thank you all for coming for now.
Maybe people are confused by the password because the password has an exclamation mark. You know what I'm talking about? So maybe people are just putting escape and then they, because someone in the general was like, I can't get into the advanced password.
Maybe.
We should stop
We
doing
should
that.
stop doing that. Yeah.
Who's doing that?
I think.
Yeah, Tyler. So should we maybe
normal?
Can we make maybe like we should maybe give an extra 2 minutes just because like they might not, you know what I mean? Like I don't think it's very clear.
Is it that deep, Emily?
No, I'm just saying I don't like if someone was like, oh, the password is blank exclamation mark, I would think that they're just being cheery by entering the exclamation. See, someone else just okay, yeah.
Are they saying that?
Alex, thank you for
yeah.
for posting that.
Yeah, I will stop doing the exclamation point. Yeah. Whoever did it first, I don't know, because I think I started doing it for the first person.
Athena had the very first tutorial of the year. I blame Athena.
Okay, she set the precedent.
See,
it was a
now
bad
someone
precedent.
asked, do we include the quotation marks?
No,
this is so confusing.
Okay, I say we all say in general chat, no more exclamation marks, and then at Athena, because Athena was the one that started it. That's my opinion, though. All right. What should we call the new project name, Jarrett?
You can just call it escape room if you want.
Escape room.
Hey, this is
with an exclamation mark or no exclamation mark.
Depends on how excited you are about this tutorial, Christian.
Did we do this tutorial last year? I don't remember this.
Me and Jay,
no, these are the new ones.
Me and Jay have like a different like sort of structure that we're kind of trying to do.
Cool. I'm
like
excited.
This is the first day of us transitioning off or like doing like something different from last year. We'll see how it works.
Are we still doing a 2D one?
We will be down the line.
Okay, good. I need that one.
Next week. It depends on what kind of 2D you're looking for. I think we're gonna do like a 2D platformer.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Because like platformers are pretty general in teaching stuff, but yeah.
I want to make a side scroller for my game this year.
Yeah, side scroller is kind of like my hopeful idea.
Yeah, same.
If anyone was wondering about how we're changing the tutorials, by the way, then past years we focused more on like concepts like this tutorial we're going to teach 2D, this tutorial we're going to teach UI. Well, this year we want to focus more on actually making like projects. So this week was a point and click. Next week will be a 2D.
Yeah,
and then like right.
Yeah, there's like a platformer that we're gonna hopefully teach, and then somewhere down the line we're gonna hope to teach like the tower defense genre, which will like focus on like kind of path making and enemy AI and stuff like that. So it should be exciting stuff, yeah. Because last year we focused a lot on just reiterating over Rollerball, like adding more stack sequentially on it. But this is gonna be like a slight turn from that. All
right. So I'm gonna get started now, just because we may have to do a lot this one. But so if anyone just recently joined, you can go ahead and open up a new 3D Unity project. You can just call it Escape Room or something, and make sure you download and import that package that was posted. And if you need help, if you don't remember how to import, or if you're new, you can go ahead and ask in chat about it. I'll start sharing my screen now.
Yes, sir.
Just sharing the entire screen works, right?
Not seeing anything yet.
Okay, you should see
my now Discord. It's
okay, now you should see my you should see Unity, right?
Yes, we got it.
Okay, so first thing, I'll show you guys the prototype of what we're going to be trying to make this tutorial. So this is the game. It's a point and click, so you should be able to hover over things and they highlight or change. And then as you click on them, the checks should change. Just so it's a puzzle, you have to try and escape. So I just like picked up that berry, and I can give it to this Eevee here. Then I can grab this Pokeball. With my Eevee and my Pokeball, I can catch the slacking, and now I can get rid of the boulder, and I win the game.
Wait, this is really cool.
So this is what we're gonna be trying to make today. So I'm gonna open up a new scene. So if you guys were wondering what is inside the asset package, it should just be a bunch of sprites and animations that we'll use. We won't need them right away.
Mm-hmm.
So firstly, since this tutorial is going to be focusing more on UI, just to kind of give a brief talk about UI, since I don't think we touched on it very much yet. So UI kind of refers to, if anyone doesn't know, is like, well, it stands for user interface, and it's kind of like the buttons or health bars and things that the player will see like plastered on the screen that they can interact with. So like if you open up a main menu or you open your inventory and you have your items, that kind of stuff in the game. So to create UI, if you like right click in your hierarchy, you should notice that there's a UI option, and it lists all kinds of different things. The main one you want to place is called a canvas. So if I click the canvas, I now have a canvas and this is in the way. Okay, so now I have a canvas and this event system should have been created. And this also, it should, if you create something else as well, like if I go into UI and create a text object, it should also automatically create in a canvas and event system. These two are needed for there to be UI. And all of your kind of UI elements will be stored inside of your canvas. You can kind of think of the canvas as like a window that it's how Unity kind of renders all of your images or text or buttons onto the screen. So for example, in the scene view, like here's my camera's looking here, and you notice there's this giant white box here. This is the canvas, and that's the new text object I just made. So since today we're basically going to do everything in UI, it might actually help if you want to zoom out just to look at your canvas, since we're not really going to make any actual objects. This game is entirely done with UI elements, so it may help to scale this out just so you have a better view of the canvas. And you notice you can move things within the canvas, and down in my game view, you can notice them being moved around as well. Okay, so a brief description specific
Oh, Jared, you
in
might
this
want to turn off your
tutorial, and I
camera.
think
Or like you were lagging just then. Sorry. Yeah.
okay, all right. So the event system is something we won't really be using, but it basically allows events to be triggered through user input. It's kind of a brief description. Use keyboard input or mouse input through their typing or arrow keys or point and click. It's going through the event system, but we don't really need to touch it because it's more like a manager than it is an actual like component of something. All right. So common UI elements that we often use in games. So if you go back into this UI drop down from the hierarchy, text is a big one, just because you may want to display dialogue or if I create this button, I now have this, it just says button and it looks pretty plain, but like, for example, if I hit play, you'll notice the button will kind of, it shows when I hover over it, it darkens, and I can also click on it. It doesn't actually do anything right now, but that's kind of what the default settings for a button is so far through like the event system. Another one is images, and that's what we're actually going to be using a lot of today, are images. And the default image is just this white square. So one thing you may have noticed is that this button here on the My Project tab down below, it looks pretty big, but when I hit play, it's now shrunk down. And that's because these UI elements aren't being scaled with my canvas. And that's one of the first things we'll kind of touch on right now. So let's look at the canvas object and we can talk a little bit about these components. So the first one, the first one is called canvas. And the main kind of option you may change is called render mode. And if you select render mode, you'll notice there's screen space, overlay, screen space camera, and world space. So we're going to keep ours on overlay, but just to kind of explain what these are in case you may want to use these later. Overlay, it renders all of your UI elements onto the screen or the camera. So like you think of like putting it on the lens. So all of your game objects are placed in the world space behind that like lens. So in that sense, all of your UI elements will appear in front of your game objects. Screen space camera, this locks it more towards the camera position rather than this big overlay. So like if I change it to camera, instead of seeing this giant white box, it would more have been shifted just to focus on where the camera is located. And in that mode, it treats it as kind of like a two-dimensional plane. So you can actually place objects in front of your UI elements. However, it's always kind of flat on the camera. And then the last option is world space. It's similar to camera in that you can get objects in front of the UI, and it also you can kind of rotate your camera around it, so it almost becomes like a billboard in your game. So like you could view your UI elements from an angle rather than from this flat two-dimensional view. But like I said, we're just focusing on screen space overlay for this tutorial.
Tyler.
Yes, questions?
Tyler asked, can we have multiple canvases for multiple layers?
So you can have multiple canvases. There is a sorting layer, so I think you can sort them through different canvases. But for example, like if you had different images, one way you might want to do it is just to turn off the canvas and turn on the other one. But for the most part, one canvas is generally I could go to, but you can use multiple in a scene. I mean, at one time, a lot of times it's good to have one active and then just swap between them. Canvas scaler. So the canvas scaler will scale it scales I'm pretty sure it's the elements within the canvas. So right now, all of the elements are set to constant pixel size, which is why the buttons are increasing in size when I go to play mode, because here these buttons is set to this very specific pixel size. So down here in this small project window, they look pretty large, but they aren't very large when I expand it to be my entire screen. So I can change that to scale with screen size. And now they've shrunk here, but when I hit play, you'll notice they're pretty small in my project view, and they'll still stay the same size when I go to a max. It's still about the same size. It's just clear to see. So if you want, you can actually set your canvas to scale with screen size, because we'll need that for the tutorial. Reference resolution is, I guess it's just kind of the resolution that the project window is going to be showing. You can leave yours in 800 by 600 just because the assets I provide in that folder are based on that resolution. So just to not stretch things out, leave it at 800 by 600. And that's the simple stuff. There are some other ones you can play around with. A lot of playing UI elements is playing around with things and try and get them to look exactly how you like. So feel free, like if you want to play around with some of these options and just to see what they do. All right. So now let's start kind of constructing with the game we want. So we're going to be making an escape game. And have any of you played like the escape, like those old games on like the browser, like Escape the Bathroom or Escape the Bedroom or something?
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of was our idea for this game. So we kind of want to implement that same functionality of looking around a room, seeing interactable objects, being able to interact with those with our mouth, and kind of solving a puzzle by knowing which order and where to use our different objects. So as I said, we're going to be using images for this. So you can go ahead and create an image inside of your canvas, and you should now just have this white square on screen. All right, so the first thing we want to do in an escape room, let's title this image actually interactable object, because this is going to be kind of a sample of the like interactable tools you find in an escape game. So now that we have interactable object, we're going to want to create a script for this. So you can create a new scripts folder. Let me go into my assets. Is there any questions so far? Sorry, I forgot to ask.
We're good, it seems.
Okay, cool. Go here. So we're going to create a new script, and I'm going to title it, let's just title it interactable object.
Jerry, I have a question. This is kind of random, but when I've been playing around in Unity, like when you make a script within the assets file and then try to drag it onto an object, sometimes the object doesn't accept it. Is there is there a reason why that happens?
Are you talking about like here where it's not telling me I can't place it? Because
Yeah,
sometimes you have to like get it in like an actual spot. It's kind of weird like that. That's the wrong
Yeah,
script.
if you kind of put it under image, like if like let's say like under that image tab that that Jared has open, it's
Mhm.
kind of like trying to see if we can fit that script into one of those data fields.
Okay.
So it doesn't really allow for that. So instead you have to like kind of drag it in that little like empty rectangle right
Okay.
under the default UI material tab. I think that would work. Or like,
You
yeah,
can just
anywhere down
place
there.
it
Yeah.
anywhere on the bottom too.
Yeah.
Like you either have to fit it in
So
between the
yeah.
components, which is hard, or just drop it on the bottom.
Yeah.
And
So
that's
basically it's probably because you're trying to drag and drop it into a component screen space, and that
Right. Okay.
the engine just doesn't like that.
And what should we call this script?
I called mine interactable object.
Okay.
All right, so first thing we're gonna, this camera thing's getting in the way. How do I get rid of that? There we go. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna want to do is add, since we're working with UI, let's add using Unity engine.ui and put it semicolon, sorry. And then we're going to be using the event system in our programming, so we're going to want to add a using for that as well. Using Unity engine dot event systems, and that was a semicolon as well. Can everyone see my scripts clearly? By the way, it's not like too small.
Yeah, we can see it.
All right, cool. So
So you could zoom in a little bit. It's a little small.
all right. So we're going to be creating a function. There's a function already set, like predetermined function, and it's called mouse hover. So we're going to call public void mouse hover. And this will trigger any time that our mouse hovers over our object. So for example, to test this, we can write do a debug.log. Just write hover, just so we know it's hovering. So just a reminder, we need to put our using Unity Engine UI, using Unity Engine.event system, and then create the public void mouse hover function with a debug.log, and that's all we have for now. So I'll save that, and I'm going to move back to the project. There we go. Now when I play the game, actually let's get it out of maximize play because I need to see. Oops. So I can hit play, and now when I hover over the object, no. Okay, maybe I did mess something up.
Wait, how do you attach the script to the object?
You're right, I didn't do that.
Yeah, that's how I was like confused. Okay, cool.
Wait, no, I have it. Interactable object. Oops.
Wait, I can't add mine to it though. Like when I drag it on the thing that says script, it's like grayed out. I can't. How do I attach it?
It's kind of
Just click
What are
on
you trying
add
to drag to?
component. Click on add component and search up interactable object.
Oh, okay.
That should work. Also,
I'm going to try something really quick just to see.
here we go.
I don't know if it's related to it, but mouse hover wasn't auto completing for me, and
Yeah, exactly.
we might not have imported the necessary library.
It might be it because I have it, but I have it working on my.
Yeah, I'll try to look over it too.
Because yeah, when I try to write a function, it says on mouse down, on mouse
Oh,
drag, on mouse
is it
enter.
on mouse over? Or no?
This is the function I have. This is the completed
Okay.
function.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
shouldn't
yeah.
use it anymore. And this function's in the actual game, the completed script.
Okay.
Let's just copy. Let's try the. I think it's the object actually. Sorry. Let me look at the pro.
Yeah, for sure. Over the GUI element or
Yeah, we need an
collider.
event. We need an event trigger on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So add this component called event trigger. So if you go back to our interactable objects, we can go add component and search up event trigger. Oh yeah, that's right. Sorry, I forgot about this step.
Nice.
Pointer.
Let's remove this completely one. We don't need this one anymore. So we have back in our script, just to reiterate, we have the public void mouse hover. And then all you have to do, you just need to remember to add, you have the script and an event trigger. And once we have the event trigger, you're going to press add new event type. And it should bring up this big list. And pointer enter. Yeah, pointer enter is the one you're going to want. Okay, that's sorry. I got myself confused. These functions are not actually defined ones. They're just ones we made up, and we're going to trigger it through the event systems. Okay.
Sounds good.
I gave a really bad explanation. So now that we have the event trigger is going to be what recognizes that the mouse hovers over the objects. And once we have pointer enter, we have the list. This list is empty. We're going to add, press the plus button, and then you're going to drag our image into that object slot. And once it's in the object slot, you can press function, scroll down. You should see our script. It should be called interactable, whatever your script's called. Mine's called interactable objects, so you should find it here. And then you should find your function. So mine is mouse hover, it's right there, and I can press it. And now when I play, it should work. Let's go out again. And there's the console log. So the
Wait, I
function's
don't see mouse
registering.
hover.
So
Did you finish defining it in your script? And then save?
I just have the script that I only have the interactable object script.
here, I
When
can
did
go
we
through it
have the
again.
mouse
I can go
hover
through it
script?
again.
Did we create 2 scripts?
No,
No,
mouse
so
hover is
interactable.
yeah.
Sorry, Christian.
No, sorry. So under the interactable object script, we defined the function called mouse hover.
Oh,
It's
should I add a
public void.
component that says mouse
No,
hover?
no, no. It's a function under the interactable object class within the interactable object script. So
Oh, can I look at
I'll post an image with it of that under
I can walk through it
tutorials.
right here again too if you
Yeah,
need
that's
to. So the interactable object currently should have the script on it, which I also titled interactable object, and an event trigger. Once you have the event trigger, you add a new event type called pointer enter. Then you hit plus. And if you drag the interactable object into that slot, your script should be listed here somewhere, and it should have kind of an arrow. So if you hover over it,
okay,
and then your
interactable
function
object?
should be listed somewhere in here. My script is called interactable object. I don't know. What is your script titled? Is the same thing or?
I don't see it.
Just make sure you save and update your script as well.
Okay, maybe that's it.
You can also try just like remove the script from the object and then re-add it.
Emily, just hop into the tutorials and I'll help you.
Were there any other questions just while we're here? Can I go back to the code for a second? This is the code I have so far, if anyone still needs it. So we create our own function called mouse hover. And then we're also going to be calling one called mouse exit, which we could go ahead and do that as well, since we're going to be adding that right now as well. If it's telling you debug.log does not exist, I think last time we found it was an issue with using. So I think if you just type unity engine.debug.log, it should work. So like instead of, I think this should do the same thing. Yeah, that still does the same thing. Mouse hover must declare a body. I'm not sure what that means unless, okay, cool. All right, so we're gonna be moving on. If there's any other questions, there's the Discord chat as well, and feel free to ask it here as well, and I'll come back to it in a few minutes, but just for the sake of time. Okay, so now we're gonna add a second event type called pointer exit. And we're gonna do the same thing. So our interactable objects should already be in the game object slot, and then we can just select this, go over to our script again, and choose mouse exit this time. All right, so now that we have that, we want to visibly show that this is actually happening. So this is gonna be part where we kind of take a tangent into an animator thing, but we'll get back to the, so this, we weren't really planning on animators to be the focus of this tutorial. So if there are any questions, we can answer more towards the end, but we're going to move through this part, just kind of do what I do here. The mouse exit function currently is just the same thing, debug.log.exit. We haven't really put anything of substance into these functions yet. We just want to know that they actually work. All right, and now we're going to actually put something in it. So we want to change this image is physical appearance. So if you look in the assets folder I had you download, there should be a sprites folder, and towards the bottom there should be two sprites called test hover and test norm. So what we can do is grab this. If you open up this arrow, it should open up a red box just called test norm, and you can drag this in to the sprite here, and that should update its sprite. Okay. So now what we want to do is add an animation and animator to this object. So if you haven't used any of these things before, this animator is a different tab, and it kind of looks like this. Yours probably should be empty, but, and then the animation tab looks like this. So in order to reach these tabs, you're going to go up to Window, go down to Animation, and you should see Animation and Animator. They should both be there. And you can select those and they should pop up. You could drag them somewhere onto your screen just because we're going to be using them for this part, so it might be helpful to put them behind something, or that way you can just switch back and forth if needed. This is the only time we're going to be using it this tutorial, just this part. So everyone should have an animator tab and an animation tab. And again, that's in window animation. All right. So we want to add, you can kind of think of an animation, the animation tab is specifically for creating animations for like moving objects back and forth from left to right, while the animator tab is more for organizing those animations and telling the game when to use each. I don't know if any of you, also if you, in order to move around this thing, this middle mouse button, if you hold it down, so like my scroll wheel, you can move it around to get a better view if yours is ever off, but that's it for now. So let's look at if we go back into our assets, we're actually going to be creating a new animator. So in the projects tab, you're going to right click go up to create, and we want to make an Animator Controller. I'm gonna name this, I already have a few of mine, so I'm just gonna call this one live tutorial, but you can name yours like interactable object or something. Since I already have a few named like that, this is just for me. So you can call yours interactable object. Mine is gonna be slightly different just because I already have one like that. And then it should open up another thing where you have an entry in any state and an exit state. And on the bottom, it should say whatever your title is called. So now we can grab our interactable object and we can take whatever animator we just created and drag it on and add it as a component. So now it should have this animator component on top of it. Does everyone see that? All right, I'm assuming there aren't any questions yet, but if there are, feel free to ask. Once we have that, what we want to do is make sure when you have your interactable object selected, the animation tab should pop up and have this create option here. It should be empty, but there should be a create animation clip. So we're going to press create. And it's going to ask you for a new, to create a new asset. So you can just name it whatever you want. So I'm just going to call mine tutorial normal or tutorial idle because this is going to be its idle state. I'm going to hit save. And now the screen should change like this. You should have this little like time bar here. And there should say add property. So I tried to make this as easy as possible. So all you have to do is come here, grab that sprite, drag it in, and that's the animation. And if you noticed, after I did that, I now have this other state, this other box just appeared in my animator with an arrow going towards it. The gold just means it's default. So once the game starts, it's automatically going to go into this animation. Is there any questions on how I did that in terms of the animator?
Sorry,
I remember
could you just repeat again how you like created the anim file, or like what you did to create the anim file? Because
yeah,
I
so
wasn't seeing that tab on my screen.
for me it was empty and I just created a new one. So for example, let's just create another UI image. So for example, when your image has no animations or no animator on
Oh,
it,
okay, yeah.
it should just look like this. You can just hit create and it should pop up with one or asking you to create a new one. I'm going to delete that object because I don't need it. And now we're actually going to make another one. So if you go down here to your animation tab, there should say there should be a drop down and the name of it should be whatever you just named your animation. So I called mine tutorial idle. So I can click on that, the drop down appears and it says create new clip. So I'm going to create that and create a second animation called tutorial hover and save that. And now similarly, I'm going to find the sprite in my project tab called test hover. I'm just going to drag the first one in. And now I have a second one called tutorial idle and tutorial hover. Is everyone caught up with that? Everyone sees that part so far? Question in the chat. Where did I drag them? Okay, good question. So you can just click the sprite and drag it basically into this timeline here. This timeline represents frames of the animation. So like it's gonna go through each of those frames. And before mine was empty, and after dragging it in, like I can drag the second one in. Now I have 2 frames. Each of these blue dots is another frame in the animation. So this is just a 2-frame animation. It's just gonna go back and forth between these 2 squares, which are just like slightly different colors of yellow. So it's basically just gonna flash. Is everyone good with that right now? So right now what we have is if we hit play, you will notice it still registers the hover and we change its sprite, but the animations aren't updating. And that's because we haven't told the object how to trigger those animations at all. They're kind of they exist, but the game doesn't know what to do with them. So we're going to tell it how to do that really quick. Okay, another question. How did I add the sprite to the tutorial hover?
Yeah, oh, sorry.
Was that in the animation of this part? Do you have the timeline available at the moment?
So just because I've done some of this before, oftentimes you have to click on the object the animation is connected to. So
Yeah,
before
make sure you
clicking
have
the
that
animation
selected.
menu, click interactive object.
Make sure you have your object selected in the hierarchy before you do this. So with your object selected, you can drag this image in. Any other questions or issues? All right, so now, as I said before, we have these animations, they exist, but the game doesn't know what to do with them. So that's where we're gonna, if we go back to the Animator tab, so the one with like all the different states in the boxes, you should have a parameter window, but if you don't, you can find it in Window Animation, Animator Parameter, and open that up. And we remember to make sure you have your object selected. We're going to hit this plus button here. And now it's going to ask you if we want to float, an int, a bool, or a trigger. So for those of you who haven't programmed before, all of these are just kind of like the data types that are available for that you can make a trigger out of. So we're going to create a bool, which is a true or false value. So we have this bool, and I'm going to call mine, I'll call it hover. If you ever wondering, this box next to hover's name represents its default value. It's kind of like unclear since there's no words to even explain what this is, but with this box unchecked, it means hover is going to start at a false value. If I checked it, hover would default value be true. So on the game's play, hover would be a true value. Unchecked, false. We want it to stay false for now. And now what we're
Sorry,
going
can you
to
repeat
do,
that one more time, Jared?
yeah, so with the parameter tab open, or just the creation part of the part about the, I guess I can go through all of it. All right, so the parameter tab, you want to hit this plus button here and create a bool, which is a true or false value. Once you click that, it should pop up and ask you for a name. You can call it, I called mine hover since I'm going to use this to tell the game when my mouse is hovering over the object. And then this here is its default value. So the default value is false because when I hit play, my mouse isn't over the object, so I don't want it to start doing the hover animation. I only want it to hover when mouse is actually hovering over the object. Okay, does that make sense for everyone? All right, so now what we're going to do is go back into our script because we need to be able to access the animators so that we know when these values are hovering yes or no. Sorry, go back one step. We don't need to go to the script yet because there's still something we can do in the animator. So you see how we have these boxes right here, and currently there's only a line to the tutorial idle, which means by default when the game starts, we're entering into tutorial idle animation, which is just the red box. But we want it to go to the yellow box whenever I hover my mouse over it to show that I'm highlighting it. So what you can do is if you right click idle, it should say make transition. So if you select that, you now have this arrow that's coming out of the box. And you can see I can snap it to all these other boxes. Like I can put it to exit, put it to, and I want it to put it on tutorial hover. So I click tutorial hover and I now have this. This is a transition. So by selecting this arrow, this other menu should now pop up. And we don't really need to worry about these elements now for this game. But what we're looking for is conditions right here. Because if we hit plus, you'll notice that the parameters I had listed previously in the animator will appear here. And because I only have one, that's the only one that's listed. So I can go ahead and select that as my parameter, which it already is since it's default. And now it's asking me for a value, true or false. So it wants to know when to go through that transition when hover is true or when hover is false. So I want this to go when it's true. So it's basically set up as it is. But we don't want to get stuck in the hover animation either. So what we can do is we can right click our hover animation in the animator again, hit make transition, and drag an arrow back into idle. And now again, we can select that arrow for the transition. This is the transition going back to idle. We can add the hover parameter, and this time we want hover to be false. So whenever hover is false, we want to get pulled back into the idle animation. While whenever hover is true, we want to get pushed into the hover animation.
Wait, can you repeat how you did that whole arrow to hover to idle?
Yeah, so if you have your Animator tab open, you can just right click and it should say make transition. You right click the box.
Okay.
And then you drag that arrow and left click it onto the other animation.
And then how did you add the behavior to the tutorial idle thing?
The transition?
I literally don't know what you did in the past like 3 minutes, sorry.
Okay, right now so as long as you have your idle animation here, do you have your animation set up? Because if not, Christian, I have to help you with that. That's farther
Okay.
behind. But if you have your animation set up and you're at this point, all you need to do is make sure that your transition arrows have their conditions on hover and be true or false. All right, if there are there any other questions? So the reason why the image is currently staying white is because we haven't, well, at least on my game, we haven't implemented it yet. So we need to actually access hover in the script because hover is just going to stay false, which means it's always going to stay. Yeah, so what we can do is we can go back to our interactable object script, and now we're actually going to add functionality to these functions. So the first thing we're going to need is we need access to our animator. So we need to create a new data type of type animator, and I'm just going to call it animator as well. So this animator is a reference to the data type, like integer or bool or game object. I want an object of type animator, and it's going to be called animator. Now, we're only going to use our own animator since it's attached to us. We can just use get component to get it on start. So we can set animator equals get component oh, my thing autocorrects when it's not supposed to. Make sure this A is capitalized because it means get component of type animator. And now our animator will be initialized to the one that's attached to us. Once we have that, what we're going to do is go down to the mouse hover function, and we're going to use our animator, and there's a function attached to the animators called set bool. And this is going to it takes two values. First, it needs to take the bool parameter that we have. Since we only have one, we need to give it its name, which is hover. So you type in its name here by double quotation marks, and then whatever value you want to set it to. So I want to set it to true. When my mouse is hovering over the object, I want that Boolean to be set to true. And similarly, I'm going to do the opposite here. Animator set bool hover, and this time I'm going to set to false. And now if I save this and I go back to the game, I can hit play. And when I hover over it, you'll notice I'm now animated. Okay. Are there any questions on that so far? Does anyone need to see the code again? I guess I could here. So here's the code again, just if anyone needs it. First, we created this data type animator, and I just called mine also animator with a lowercase a, but you can change the name if it's confusing. I initialized it by doing get component animator. So it's just going to get the whatever animator is currently attached to the object holding the script. And then I'm going to use the set bool function to set hover to true for when the mouse hover, and in mouse exit, I want it to set to false. And that should animate your object. Okay. All right, so now in escape games, it's common for text to be displayed. So for example, like if I'm trying to escape the bathroom and the door's locked, when I click the door, there needs to be some kind of text that tells me, hey, the door's locked. Go find, since I can't find, or I need to know that the door's locked so I can go back and figure whatever the puzzle is out. So we're going to add a text object. So you can right click in your hierarchy or right click the canvas, go to UI and create text. And that should get plopped into your canvas. And I'm just going to move this up a little bit. The font's really small, so I'm going to change mine to like size 26 font. You can also change the font color if needed. Right, for now, mine's fine being black, so I'm just going to leave it as black. So a couple of things with text objects. Here's the text box I can change, so I can write like whatever I want. And if you notice, my if you notice down here, the text here is bigger than what's actually in the box. The box is limiting me. So there's this option down here called horizontal overflow. I can wrap it to overflow, and now all my text appears. But that may not be a good option. For example, if I keep going out of the screen, it'll just go on forever. So actually, I'm gonna skip this part and come back to it just because for time's sake. So for now, it's just gonna say escape the room. So if someone wants to remind me to go back at the end towards the text box, there's a way to change it to where the text won't, like to more customize your text boxes, but for the sake of trying to complete the game on time, we're gonna go back to it towards the end since it's optional. All right, so we have a text box. But we need the text to change based on how we interact with our objects. So for example, if we click on an object, we may want it to display some kind of text. Are there a lot of people who can't see the animations, by the way? Because if so, we can go back and look at it. All right, so just briefly with the animations. So your interactable object, you should have, let's say in your assets folder, you should, if it worked correctly, you should have 3 assets here basically. One animator that looks like this, mine's called live tutorial, and then 2 of these triangle things, which are the actual animations. This one's called tutorial hover, and this one's called tutorial idle. You guys can ignore these ones. These are from when I was working on this earlier. So you should have these 3 things. And if you click on them, it should, for example, clicking on the animation should open up this tab here. Okay, yeah, that's a good one. And in your event trigger, which is on your interactable object, you need to make sure you change the event type here, because when you create a new one, it autos to whatever the last one was, and we don't want that. We want them to be separate events, one for hovering and one for exiting. So, and since they're kind of small, it's hard to actually tell which one is which. Just make sure you change it to whichever one you need. And then also the animator should look like this if it's implemented correctly. I'm gonna keep moving back on, but if there's still questions with the animation, feel free to like message in Discord as well, and people will help you. All right, so we want the text to be interactive with the object. So when we click on an object, for example, we want it to change the text. But how should we do this? For example, should we have the objects write to the text directly? For example, if I click the interactable object, should the interactable object directly tell the text to change? That could work, but the problem is if we start adding multiple objects that require, like if you want to have lots of different text options, it may not be beneficial to have every single interactable object we have referencing the text and trying to do that like calculation to figure out which text it should display. So it may be helpful to create a game controller instead and have the game controller decide which text gets displayed when I click. For example, like when I click the door and I don't have a key and I'm trying to escape the room, the door is going to tell me it's locked and I can't exit. But if I click the key, it should say a different type of text. And if I click the door with the key, it should also say a different text. So we're going to create a game controller that figures out which text to display when. So you can go ahead and create an empty object here, and I'm going to change mine's name to game controller. And now we're going to need to create a new script for that game controller. So I already have a script called game controller from when I made this, so I'm just going to name this one game manager, like someone said in the chat, and we'll go from there. So, whoops, that's not actually what I want. Don't do that. Don't name it game manager. Okay, let's create the script again. We'll just call it tutorial controller then. It looks like there's something might have already been named game manager. So tutorial controller. So now I have this empty script. So let me pull up my notes on that really quickly. So first thing, if we want this game controller is going to be how we change the text. So the first thing we need to do is give it access to our text object. Because right now we have a text object, but no way to change its value. So we're going to create a public capital text, and then I'm going to call it text box. And then when I hit save this public text box. Oh, similarly, you need to add using Unity Engine UI so it knows what a text object is. So make sure you add this using statement at the top, using Unity Engine.ui, and then add public text box. And we can save that, go back to the project, add our script to our game controller, which is just an empty object with this script on it, so tutorial controller. And now it should say text box with none text in it. So we can go ahead and grab our text and drag it into the slot here, and now it should say text to say that it has a text object. Okay, so now we need a way for our object to tell the game controller to change the text. So we need a function that will allow our object to interact with our game controller. So from here, let's create a function that can be accessed. So we'll create a public void, and I'm going to call it change text. And then it's going to need an input string, a string of what actual text we want. Well, I'm going to create two, actually, string success and string failure, because later on we're going to want to know if we've succeeded in doing the puzzle or not, and it needs to change its text display based on that. So like it needs to tell us if we won or not. So it's going to receive two strings, a string success and a string failure. And then once we have that, what we're going to do is we need to get the actual text part from the text box and change it. So if you type text box, get component, and now capital T, because we were looking for an object of type text. It's changing. Okay, so we have object of type text, capital T, dot, and we want the text component of it. And we're just going to set this equal to the string we got, which is our success string. So we can save that. And this still won't work for our game yet. So if you hit play, nothing would happen. And that's because our object needs to have access to our game controller. So what we can do is go back to our interactable object script, and we need access to the game controller. So just to make it easy, we'll do public public game controller. I'm just gonna call it game controller. Oh, sorry, game object. What am I? It's not a controller's not a public game object, game controller. So you have public game object, game controller. We can save that. And now we need to access that function. So whenever we click, we want the text to be displayed. So what we're going to do is create another function here called public void mouse click. This is just one we made up, this function. And what it's going to do is get access to the game controller that we're going to give it. So I can type game controller. Give me a second. Game controller dot get component, and the component we want is the name of the script. So I called my script tutorial controller. So we're going to type tutorial controller in here, and it's going to search for a component of type tutorial controller. So make sure that is the name of your script. And once we have that, we're going to hit dot, and now we have access to the function that we previously created. So I called my function change text. So I can do dot change, is it capital T? Yes. Change text. And now I need to give it 2 strings. But this object doesn't have any strings. So for the sake of right now, let's just say hello and goodbye. So now I gave it 2 strings. Oops, that's not what I want. So now, oh, my internet, I just got a notification telling my internet is unstable. Can everyone still hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you good now. Yeah, it just cut off for a little bit.
Okay, so everyone should have this line here. I can stay here for a second because it's long for people to write it in, but you should access the game controller, which is the public variable I created up here. Component, type the name, and then whatever the dot name of the function. And I gave it the scripts hello and goodbye. And I can save that and go back into Unity. And when I click on my interactable object, I notice I now have a slot for an object. So what I can do is grab my game controller and drag it into that slot. And now when I hit play, okay, give me, we need to add the event trigger. I forgot about it again. So what we need to do, currently we have the function set up, but it isn't being triggered by anything. So when we go to our event trigger on our interactable object, we hit add new event type. And this one we want pointer click. So once you have selected pointer click, select this again, because remember it always also the last one was. We go back to our script, mine is called interactable object. And now I'm looking for my function called mouse click. And now mine should work when I play the game. I can hit play, and now it says hello. Does change text currently have any code in it, or is it just an empty function? Change line of code in it. It currently has this line. It takes whatever our text box was. It does get component to get the actual text component in that object, and changes it to the string we set here, the parameter that's being given. Currently, that's all it does. So right now, if you noticed earlier, this change text should be receiving 2 strings, one called success and one called failure. So right now I hard coded it in, which isn't a very good solution to things. I just wrote in that it should be called hello and goodbye. So let's give kind of the game developer a more flexibility with what they want to say in their game. So what we're going to do is create a public string variable called success text, and public string variable called failure text. And if we save that, we can save that, go back into Unity, and our script should update. So now here's my interactable object script. I now have a little field here for success text and failure text. But one thing you may notice here is that it's very small. So for example, if I just started typing again, and then I hit play, I gave it a really long string. Oh, I didn't update it, did I? No, I did not. All right, so if I go back in the script, we don't have to say hello or goodbye anymore because we now have inputs we gave the developer. So we're going to change hello to success text and goodbye to failure text. Now we can save it again, come out of here, hit play. It gives me this really long line, but you notice here, this isn't very easy to see and it's kind of hard to edit. So if I want to come back through it, like I don't know how long my text actually is when it's in this box. So kind of a helpful thing you can do that's really easy is we're going to, if you go back to our interactable object script and you type square bracket, text area, this adds an attribute to this variable called text area. We can do the same for this. I don't know a really good way to explain what an attribute is. Christian might be able to do it better than me, but basically we hit save. You notice instead of it being a line, it's going to turn into a box. So we have much more space to actually see our text, and it helps a lot when we're actually editing things later on. Now I can clearly see whatever's in the box and say you win.
So what do you type exactly? I mean,
yeah, so above the variable, or you'd want to do square bracket, text area, no spaces, capital T, capital A. And do the same thing above the variable for the failure text.
Interesting.
Okay, so let me look at my notes again really quick. Okay, nice. So now what we have here is we have one object, but let's say we want to have multiple. So like in that prototype I showed you, there were multiple things you could interact with. So here, I'm actually going to delete the text into success text and the failure text just so it's empty. And I am going to go to the assets and I'm going to drag it into the assets, the project tab, my interactable object, and turn it into a prefab. So you should have this blue box here that's called interactable objects. If you click on it, it will display its options as a prefab. We kind of touched on what a prefab is in the last few tutorials, but just to go over it again, it's kind of like a template that you can use to create multiple kinds of an object. So whenever I create another one, it will have an exact copy of all these options set. So I want it to have like an interactable script on it. I want it to have these event triggers. I want it to have this an animator. So it has all the things I want. So from here, I can kind of, so let's create another one and drag it in. Now I have a second one. So let's call this one the door. The first one, I'm gonna change its name to door now. So it's not called interactable object. It's now called door. And the second one, I'll call it key. So theoretically, and then spread them out so you can see them. What I want to happen is when I select the key, or I won't be able to successfully select the door until I already have the key, which means my game needs to know somehow that I had previously selected the key when I select the door. So this kind of information storage is a good thing for the game controller again. So we need to add a functionality of the game controller that allows the player, or allows the game to remember which objects we've successfully clicked on and which ones we haven't. That way, it knows which text to display, whether the success, you win, or the fail because you didn't have the key. So let's add that in.
When you push play right now, should the text change to the success text and the and failure text?
Yes. Oh, that's because I deleted the text, but theoretically, yes, the text should change.
Okay.
Mine doesn't have any text like in it right now since it's empty, so it's just going to display an empty string. But yes, if you put text in, it should display. All right, so now we need to add to our game controller. Let me look at my note really quick again. All right, so now what we need to do is add that functionality to the game controller. So we can kind of think about how we want to actually get that done. So when we click on a game object, our game object needs to pass some kind of indicator to our game controller that it was selected. And it also needs to tell the game controller needs to somehow figure out which text to display. So it needs to know whether the success requirement was met or not. So the way I chose to do it was to have the game controller pass so the interactable object will pass multiple scripts. It's going to pass its name kind of like as an ID or it's going to pass multiple strings to the game controller. So it'll pass a name, so it will tell the game controller which object it is, so the game controller knows. It'll pass, and then it will pass a requirement name, so that the game controller knows which objects needed to have been pressed in order for the text to be displayed successfully. So that may sound complicated, but it won't be too difficult to implement. So first thing we need to do is we need to add two new public string variables to our interactable objects. We can come back into here, our interactable object script. And right now we should have our success text, our failure text, a game controller, and an animator. So we can add a couple more. We're going to add public string name and public string requirement. And after doing that, oh, sorry, I don't know if this will update on the prefab. Oh, it will. Okay, we're good. Yeah, so now you notice we have a success text spot, a failure text, a name, and a requirement. So like this is the door. So I want to say that its name is door, and the requirement it needs is key. And likewise on the key, I would say that its name is key, and the requirement would be none. It doesn't need a requirement. And we can just change it to like you unlocked the door and escaped, or the door is locked. I'm just putting in filler text to these boxes just so we can see that something happened. You can put whatever you'd like in these boxes, the text boxes. The important thing is going to be the name. You want to make sure you spell the name correct here because we're going to put that into the scripts later, and the spelling needs to be correct for it to work. So just remember what you put in as each one's name or requirement. You pick up a key, and it doesn't really need failure text. We'll just put none. Okay, so now we have this, and now let's look back at our game controller, because if we remember correctly, our game controller only right now is taking two strings, the success text and the failure text. But we decided that it needs to know which object it's communicating with, and it needs to know what the requirement is for success. So we're going to add that in. So let's create another string called, we'll call it name to be consistent, and string requirement. So now we're passing in 4 values. And it needs to know which one is coming and which is the requirement is. But now it needs some kind of way to kind of parse that information and figure out if, like, it needs to know if the key was previously interacted with. So it needs kind of some kind of data storage option. It needs to know if we communicated with the key before we talked to the door, because the door won't open unless we have the key. So Unity has this a data type called a dictionary, which I think it's in other languages too, right? Like Python. So we're going to create a dictionary. You can call it private dictionary, and I'll type it out first and then explain after. But we want ours to be a string, comma, you can write string, comma, bool. I'm going to call mine inventory and set it equal to a new dictionary of type string, comma, bool. Okay, so a dictionary is like it keeps keys and values, so it's like similar other data structures as well if you've done a lot of programming. So this first one here is it's called like the key. So when I pass this string into the dictionary, it's going to be associated with a bool value. That way I can tell, like if I give it the string, it'll tell me the bool that's associated with it. So let's we needed to actually initialize the dictionary because right now we have a dictionary, but there's nothing in it, and we need it to store the objects in our scene. So the way we would do that is we can do it in the start function. We can hit inventory dot add, and now I'm going to give it the names of my items. So colon for door, and we'll initiate them all as false to say they haven't been basically grabbed yet. Key. And then because I was using the keyword none to say there is no requirement, I'm also going to add one here called none. And this one's automatically going to be set to true. And this may not make a lot of sense here, but the way I implemented it is it will help later on. Also, by the way, when it comes to these problems like this, there's usually a lot of different ways you can program things to work. And so like if you guys are really into programming, feel free to like try and figure out better ways or different ways to implement similar things with programming on your own than the way I did it.
Could you theoretically use an array where you have like just a bunch of values, and like the first is the string of the object name, and the second, well, okay, so you have an array of like all of these, you have an array of an arrays. So I'm getting complicated, but you have two, you have an array with the string name, and then whether or not you put it up, and then you put that all into a larger array.
Yeah, you could probably do an array of arrays. I just chose to use this way instead, but
yeah,
there's a lot of
there's
ways
a lot of ways
it.
you can implement it. It just depends on what kind of data structure you want to use.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, then what's the difference between like a dictionary and an array, or is it just like an untitled
A dictionary, you can see here, dictionaries are like particularly useful because you can just use the add function to, and even though we're like hard coding a bunch of stuff, use the ability of a dictionary is like it can store like an infinite amount of objects because of how it's implemented. And so like for scalability, this would be nice.
Right.
Using an array, it's like a little bit harder to like make sure that it scales the same way. But yeah.
Right, that makes sense. Interesting. Okay. Cool.
Okay, cool. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our change text function because now we're giving it a name and a requirement. So we would need to know which text to display. So first thing, we're going to need some kind of if statement. So we can go ahead and create that. And for now, we don't really know what it's going to be. I'm just going to write if true.
For some reason, this is a random question, but for some reason, my cursor, like when I click between a bit of text and I start typing, it's deleting the text after the cursor. You know how to turn that off?
I think it's that autocorrect thing, right? I think mine's been doing that too. I haven't turned it off. I haven't really spent the time to look at it yet. Sorry. So now we're going to add the mine just did the same thing. It's gonna do it again, isn't it? So now we have our it's going to either do the success text or the failure text, but it's only doing it it's always doing success since we set it to true, but we have the requirement now. So what we're going to do is we need to look inside of the inventory and see if the requirement was completed. So we just do if requirement. and this will display, this will return a true or false value if it, or the Boolean associated, so a true or false value. So we could put that in and it would display as well. Where I can also add, just to make sure that the value exists, we would type inventory dot, because theoretically you could make a mistake and pass something that doesn't exist. So inventory dot contains key, and then we'll give it the name, and inventory dot contains key, and this as well will just return a Boolean of whether or not it exists. So we're going to check and see if the name, the ID given, actually exists in the dictionary. If the requirement exists, and then if that requirement is true. And if that's so, then we're going to set the text to be to the success text. Otherwise, we're going to set it to the false text. So now if we go back to our game, we save all that, we go back to our game. Oh, I didn't pass the object in yet. Yeah, so if you go back to the interactable object, back down to mouse click, you'll notice I still am only passing on 2 strings, so we need to give the other ones. So I called them name and requirement, so I can add those here. And I save that, and now I can go back to the game, and if I hit play.
Wait, can you show what you just wrote
Yeah.
a second ago?
Actually, let me just show this really quick and then I'll go back to it. So when I go back here, I can click here, it says the door's locked because it's a fail. I click here. Oh, that's right. They haven't been switched yet. Okay. All right, I'll go back here a second. We'll fix that. So this is what I just wrote. I went back to the mouse click in the change text function, and I added the public variables that I called up here, the string, the one for its name and the one for the requirement. And I added those here. Was that the one you needed, Emily, or did you need to see the other one as well?
That's good.
So let's look at the key. Key one. Oh, it doesn't have access to the game controller. So if you notice, when I created the new one, the prefab didn't have an automatic slot here, so we need to add that in.
Mm.
So when you do prefabs, just make sure all your settings are what you need them to be. That way when I hit play, now I can hit the door's locked. I picked up the key. Oh, the door's still locked. So something went off with that. Oh, yep, that's right. Because we can pick up the key, but the thing doesn't record that it never changes the value to true that once we picked up the key. So that's what we want to do next. Because our key value is currently always set to false. So we need to change that to whenever it's a success. So if it's a success, we can add this line here, inventory, and we use the square brackets, pass the name, the thing that's, and set it equal to true. And this will change its value to true. Now, when we go back to the game, so we have inventory name equals true. When we press play,
Shouldn't the inventory requirement is true?
grab the key, and we unlock the door and escape. So
Okay.
requirement isn't the one because the name is the one that the object we're interacting with. So when we succeeded in its interaction, we want to know that we succeeded.
Okay.
Like if in the key example, we're passing key, we're passing none, and we're passing like you picked it up and nothing. So we want to change it to let it know the key one is set to true. We don't like the other one would just be the done value. Okay. So now we have that. So that's basically everything you would need to. This is the foundation of implementing that prototype. So the rest of the tutorial basically would just be implementing that prototype. We have all the coding in, the rest of it would just be specific values tailored to that prototype. So If we want to use those assets I gave you, we can go to that next. But for now, I think I could stop for to ask questions if there were anything anyone wanted to ask before we
Yeah,
do
so
that.
my text isn't changing. It was changing before we changed the input strings to be variables, like when it was just text. But now it's not changing at all. But I don't know.
Uh, so it works, but sorry, say that again. It works when?
It worked when like before we had variables. So like when success and failure were just like strings that we wrote, like when we wrote like hello like or bye or whatever.
Okay.
Um, and I'm not sure why it's not working now.
So you're saying before we turned it into text areas.
Yeah,
So this text area thing shouldn't change the functionality of it at all.
no,
So
it's where we
it's
wrote
probably something else we added since then, right?
probably. I'm gonna debug some stuff
Okay.
and figure it out.
Let me know if you need to see any of the scripts or anything. We can look at those.
Okay.
Could I see one more time the like what we should have like on your end? What it
So
should.
currently, yes.
Yeah.
So currently we should have basically just these two squares of the text object. When we hover over them, they should light up to change. And we should be able to click on them to display to have the text change. So like this one is going to tell me the door's locked right now because I haven't completed its requirement. When I press the key, I pick up the key, and now I can press the door and escape because I completed the door's requirement. That's the foundation we need to make the rest of the escape game.
When I click my like either red box, when I hover over it, it does change color, but then it doesn't update the text. Could you go over where the text updating part is?
So when you click on them, it might, if nothing's happening when you click, that might be part of the event thing. So when we, you have to add this other point and click event and make sure you change this one to the other function. If it might still be on your mouse hover or mouse exit, so that way clicking wouldn't actually change anything. So make sure this changes the mouse click. But I can show the code as well. The mouse, this is my mouse click function. So it takes the game controller variable I asked for. It gets the script's name, the get component of the script, and then it calls that change text function, and then I just pass off the four string variables I have declared up above. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it was the first thing. I'm gonna double check that right now.
Okay. This is my current change text to variable as well, about function as well.
That's weird.
Any other questions, or should we move on to actually put the stuff, all the assets I gave you together?
I still can't figure out why it's not displaying the text. I guess you can move on, but I don't know if how everyone else is doing.
Have you checked each of the change text function and the mouse click function, and then also that clicking? Well, I guess you said it worked before, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's calling the right it's finding the right object.
Did you make sure you pass the game controller into the object here? Because the so your event trigger should have the 3 different events on it for hovering, exiting, and clicking, and they should each be different. Your interactable object should have the 4 text variables and the game controller.
Right.
Your interactable object should have this script on it, where it gets the public game controller. And then when you click on it, it passes the scripts off, the text strings off. Make sure there aren't any like random errors in the random like typing errors either, like you're missing parentheses or something, because that could mess things up too. And then the game controller has this script on it, where it has a dictionary, public text box, and then it just text box get component text, and it changes the variable based on what's given. I'm gonna move on just so we can for other people, but
Sure.
if you still have issues by the end, we can look at it again. Okay, so the game we had made earlier, if you want to take another look at the prototype just so we can see what we're trying to make. Save that. So this is the prototype. So what we want to have, we want 5 of these objects, 5 interactable objects, and each of them are going to display text differently. So like this one has this EV, can pick up these two. These two can pick up right away with no requirements. This one requires the berry, and this one requires the EV and the Pokeball. Then once I've done that, I can get rid of the door. So that's the order we want. And we also want to add this background image. So the simplest to the scene we are currently working on. Where is my scene at? This one. So if you look at the assets folder I gave you, it has the sprites, the animations, and it actually has animators as well. But so I have my background image, this cave background. So on my canvas component, because right now the canvas doesn't really have a way to display an image, and we kind of want it to. So if we add a component, we can add a search image. And now it should just be this big white box because that's the default image. I can give it this sprite, and now it will have the background. Another issue is text we noticed now that it has a background image. It's very hard to read. So I can select the text object right here, select that, and let's just do white. So my internet connection's unstable again, so white text object. So let's implement, next let's do the 5, because we know we want to have 5 of them. Right now we only have 2. So we can go back to our prefab, interactable object, and I'm going to drag in 3 more of them. 1, 2, 3. So now I have all 5 objects, and they're all placed underneath this first one. So like I can drag them out so I can see them. And this one. So now I have all 5 of my objects. Now let's rename them all so I know what they are. So the door can stay the door, but I'm going to change this name to folder just so I know that's what it is. This key, let's just make this the berry. This one, I'm going to make the Pokeball. This one, I'll call this. You can name these whatever you want as well. Just make sure you know what the names are. And this one is Eevee. Okay, so now I have them all 5 named. Each of them needs that game controller. I don't think they all have it. So I'll quickly do that. So selecting the ones that don't have the game controller, I can drag my game controller in. So here's this one. Next, this one. And then I'm kind of speeding up here, but if anyone has questions, feel free to tell me to slow down or shout it out. So now I have the 5 objects and they all have the game controller on it. They don't really need text yet. So now let's do visually. We don't want them all to have, so like currently they're all the same red box and they all operate the same way. We want them to look differently, right? And so I added those, that's why we added those sprites. So if you go back to the sprite folder I added, the first layer of the sprite folder has all the different sprite sheets you can open up and look at. But So for example, I'm going to change their default image just so I have a better time placing them and knowing what they are in the scene. It won't only affect the gameplay because it goes to the animation right away, but just so I know what I'm looking at. So like this one is the slacking. So I can find slacking idle and give it the first image. Now I have this image of slacking. Next, I have the Eevee, who's hiding in the bush. I can find the normal sprite and drag it onto the Eevee. Now I have the bush. The Pokeball is in Pokeball Norm. Here's the Pokeball Norm sprite. I can drag that in. The berry is called Berry Norm. I can drag that in as well. And lastly is the boulder, which I can find right here. Boulder Norm. Drag that in. So one thing you notice is that scaled, like the boulders should cover this big space, while the boulder and the berry are the same size, even though they should be very different sized in the actual screen. So we can change that by, let me just move these out of the way first. So I know the slacking is going to go around here. I know this bush is going to go around here. I know this berry is going to go here. And I know this boulder is going to go around here. So let's look at our slacking. You know, if I just start like scaling things, it won't really work the way I kind of want it to. So sorry, let me look at the prototype really quickly again. For example, here I have the image. So it has all the same components. So we can basically do this all with just our same components we had earlier. So let's look at my sample scene. What I'm going to do is set, check this box here to preserve the aspect ratio. This preserves the aspect ratio as when, and then we're going to set native size. This is still slightly too small, so I actually did just scale it by 2. And now it's about the size like we kind of wanted it to be. And place that in here. Next, the berry, we want to do the same thing, preserve aspect ratio and hit set native size. And it's also a little smaller, so I'm just going to scale this as well. This actually turned out to be about the same size, but set native size is, it's making it more accurate towards the way the sprite was originally set. So like the sprites for these are very different sizes, but it's defaulting them all to fit in the same cube and shrinking some down and stretching others when they don't need to be. So by setting preserve aspect and set native size, we're kind of scaling it back to how the aspect ratio they should be in. And then because this canvas is getting scaled to fit the aspect ratio, these ones we can just kind of pop these in as well. Scale this by 2. And now we have this object. Grab the boulder, preserve aspect ratio, set native size, and then do by 2 again, and place this in. So this is covering my text, which I don't necessarily want, so I may move it up a little bit. And lastly, I can grab the Pokeball, do preserve aspect ratio, set native size, and then again, just pull it back up to 2. And I don't know, that looks all right. So now we have our objects in, but if you notice we hit play, we have it looking fine, and they immediately set back to the boxes, just different size boxes. So the problem we have is that they all still have the exact same animator on them. So if I scroll down to the bottom, I can find my animator. So I'm currently selected, let's do the boulder. I'm currently selected on the boulder. I scroll down to the bottom, and I still have the controller called Live Tutorial, which is the default one I made for the boxes. So I didn't want to have you guys focus on just making a bunch of animators, so I actually gave you those, and they're in here, the sprites. You go into sprites, the folder I made you download, animations, animators, and you can actually just drag and replace these in to match the objects. So here's the boulders, berry, Pokeball, slacking, and the EV. Now when I hit play, they maintain the actual images and they look the way they should, but they don't function the way they do yet. For example, this one still thinks it's the door. This one has nothing. This one is the key, and these ones are nothing. So if we want to, you can write whatever text you want, but we are going to add more text to it. And one other problem that's going to arise is that the way I had set it up previously, so if there are probably better ways to expand this, but I wanted to have two requirements. You needed to do two things before you could successfully complete this slacking. And our coding so far is only set up towards one. So what we can do is we would have to, there's probably, like I said, there's probably better ways to do these scale things, but I just did it how I thought was the easiest. I can change string text to actually need another string called requirement two. Requirement two. And then we would just do this as well. It would need both inventory requirement and inventory requirement two. So both of those must return true. And one thing to know, not all of them need a second requirement too. So if you type equals none, equals true. No, that's the string, sorry. I'm gonna default this string value to be none because I know none will always be set to true. So if something doesn't pass a string requirement, I think this has to be at the end actually. I don't remember. So let's move this to the end. Okay. So I have my optional string requirement two, which is here. This equal sign means it's optional. When I call the function, I don't need to pass a string here, and it will just default to be the value none, because none is always true in it here. And then the rest of it should be the same. Now we just need to change our actual object. So if we go back to our object script, by the way, are there any questions? I haven't asked yet in a little bit. Yep. Any questions so far? As this part, you can kind of add things or modify things as you want, but so if you look back here at our we need a second requirement string. So let's go public string requirement two. That way we can enter where the second one is needed, and then we will just pass off. We're just gonna pass it all off. Pass off requirement two. Save it. That looks about right. And when we go back to our game, we would just implement how we wanted these objects to be accessed. So like this one, it's called the boulder, and it requires a slacking. It doesn't have a second one. Berry has no requirements. It's called berry. Whoops, I opened the prefab. The name is slacking, requires the EV and the Pokeball. And the name is EV, and it requires the berry and done. And then I just hard coded the actual, just hard coded what my things were in the dictionary. So you would just go back in this dictionary and change those as well to add the actual values I needed. So you're slacking. Those are the 5, and then I could change their values as well. So I think the last one is. And that should function the same way. I just didn't enter the changing text, so you guys can put whatever text you wanted in, but this is basically the same thing as the prototype. So I need this. Oh, the object's disappearing. So in my prototype, every time I still successfully completed item, I would have the objects disappear. We would go back into
Jared, can you repeat that one more time? Sorry, you got on a
our
little bit.
object script. I was just saying in our the prototype, we had it set up to where every time you clicked an object and you succeeded, it would disappear just to tell you you did it. So if we wanted that functionality again, the way we would do that is the way I had did it was instead of making this void, you can change it to bool. And for those who don't know, this is its return type. So whenever a function is completed, it returns a value. I think void, I pick return. When it's bool, you have to have it return a Boolean value, so true or false. So if it was succeed here, we would return true, and here we would return false. And that means when I get that value, I can come back into the interactable object here, and I can test to see if it succeeded or not, and then have this object turn itself off. So I can just say if, put this entire thing in an if statement, because it's now returning a true or false value. So if it returns true, I want it to turn itself off. And the way I would do that would be by saying get component, because it's the component on the object itself. So I can just say get component straight away. I want the image because these are all images. And then the property I want access to is the enabled property. So if you remember from our last tutorial, one of the first tutorials, we would turn game objects off by setting their set value to false. For images, you can't. It works differently. They don't have a set active function. It's just the property. You would set that equal to false. And with that, now I can hit play in the object earlier, or any questions, or if you're I can grab all these items now and they disappear. This one's glitchy, but that's
When
the
you're
cool
done, Jared,
functionality.
you hop on Discord.
Yeah.
Just when you're done.
Okay. Are there any questions for anybody? I can briefly talk about that scaling text. I'll do it through my prototype scene just because it already has it and it's easier to explain that way. Is making my objects, yes, question in the chat. Return type of the change text function to a bool so that it would return a true or false value, and I could just put that into an if statement, and then I would just use get component image to get the image function in the image component of my objects, and then I just do dot enabled. Enabled is like a property that they have, and set it to false. Does that help, Alex? Cool. Okay, so the text I was doing, if you notice here in the slacking one, I created this really long block of text, and it was actually so long that it was too big for the text box. So for example, let's just copy it and put it into the other scene so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So let's grab the canvas slacking. The success text is this. Let's make it as both for now. So we can just click on it right away and we hit play. I hit this and you see it's going way off the side of the screen. So I can, if I click my text object to try and figure out how to fix that or why it's doing it, you'll notice I have it set to horizontal overflow, so I can put it back to wrap, in which case if I hit play, all the text will basically just vanish now. It's like I click it and all my text is gone. So how do I fix that? I can have vertical overflow, but the problem with that is it still isn't, that's not a very good looking, like I just want it to be over the top. I don't want it to come down like that. So the question is, how do I fix it? Because I could try overflow both, but that overflows horizontally before vertically. So it's still its first problem. And the way I figured out the way you can fix it is let's go back to the prototype scene just to show. Canvas is fine. There's a component called content size fitter. And what it does is it fits the child objects of a parent. So for example, what I do, I create an empty game object. So you guys can create an empty game object and then add a content size fitter to it. So I can do that in the other scene as well, just go with you guys. So inside my canvas, so I can right click the canvas, create an empty, and now I have this empty here. I'm going to add a add component, content size fitter. Drag the text object to be a child of that original one. And now I'm pretty sure I can scale this width value here to be like 400. I don't know what I said that to. This is unconstrained. I'm pretty sure that's right. I noticed this chat. Let me look at it in a second. Whoops. Is this right? No. Oh, that's because it's still on overflow, isn't it? I don't want it on overflow. I want it on this. Hit this. You don't want best fit. Oh, yeah, thanks for coming, Alex. Yeah, if you guys need to go, feel free to go. We're just going over this last bit, and then that'll be it. Thank you guys all for coming. Let me look at the prototype again. I think I changed the text, so I have it set to wrap and overflow. So I go to, so you should be able to set the other one to wrap and overflow then. Sorry, a lot of things with UI is very, like I said before, you kind of have to play with it to figure out what exactly you want. Okay, that's still not what I want, but what you want to do, the content fitter is the way to go. And then I think there might have been an option in the text box. I'm not noticing. Oh, it's anchored to the top left. That's right. So let's try that. Sorry, I'm trying to like refigure out how to do this. I did it earlier. Yeah, you see this? The box just changed. No. Shoot. 100% object 700. I don't want to take you guys over 8, so if I run out of time, I may figure it out and just post it later if you guys want to know, really want to know. But Sorry, I can't figure it out now. What the heck did I do the first time? Oh, I think it's just me and you two. I'm gonna I'm gonna come to you guys. Christian, you can stop the
Uh,
recording if you want.
Yeah.